Do you folks know how Moscow, Idaho got its name? Fixing to tell you. But it's a story that stretches back a long ways. Back before there was the internet, before people had cell phones. This town is older than your parents. And that's pretty darn old if you ask me. No, this story starts way back in time. There wasn't much here but chunks of rock and dirt and a bunch of grumpy old dinosaurs munching and chomping on each other and the local plants. In fact, here really wasn't here. It was over 1,000 miles that away, as the pterodactyl flies, because the Earth has these giant plates made of millions of tons of rocks called continents. And those continents, which are cooled down chunks of the rock that make up our planet, the third planet in our solar system, they kind of float on top of a squishy layer of the Earth miles and miles down below us called the mantle. Since the continents are floating, they move around. Not quickly, mind you. These are huge, heavy things that make up giant parts of our planet. But they do move, slowly. So this story starts about 1,082 miles, as the pteranodon flies, away from here. Well, in that far-off time and place, a bunch of stuff happened I'm going to skip over because it's just a bunch of falderall about dinosaurs and how the atmosphere had a higher oxygen content than we do now, so it could support giant insects like dragonflies the size of small children, and how it took millions of years for things to change. And well, there's just not much point in getting too wrapped up in the stories of the great cataclysm that happened that ended up ending the age of the dinosaurs and making room for mammals to repopulate the planet. No, we're going to start when Moscow was still about 22 miles from here, as the crow flies. Did you know there were crows way back then? I do. I asked one and he told me. Oh yes. During the late Miocene epoch, many different kinds of avian species, that's a word for bird by the way, avian, lived all over the continent of North America. Crows are very smart birds and spend a lot of time discussing geology and natural history. Unfortunately, they do this at the top of their lungs early in the morning, and all we hear is caw, caw, caw. So I can understand if you didn't know that birds have been around even before there was a Moscow. One beautiful and slightly cloudy with a 54% chance of precipitation day, precipitation means rain by the way, or at least that's what the crow told me, there was a rumbling. There was a shaking and a moving and all kinds of noise. And then up out of the ground, kaboom, volcanoes erupted. That's right, giant volcanoes blew their tops and blasted molten lava all over this area. Whoosh, kaboom! And they went on erupting and blowing their tops and spreading that ooey gooey magma all over the ground. They went right on doing this right through dinner time and even through the bedtime stories that all little volcanoes love to hear from their mamas and papas when they're tucked down for bed, nestled deep in the mantle. Oh yes, they were having a grand time with all this lava stuff, and it got spread far and wide. Now lava is pretty hot when it comes out. You wouldn't want to touch it. It's a lot hotter than a campfire, and you wouldn't want to roast any marshmallows around it. No, lava is molten rock. It's rocks heated up so hot that they turn all mushy, just like an over-toasted marshmallow, and the rock starts to float. We call this stuff igneous rock, by the way. That means it came from a volcano as magma. So we had a flood of igneous rock mushing and squishing all over the region, but over time it cooled off. Then the winds began to blow and dust blew everywhere, and some of that dust settled and then some more settled, and whoosh, you had dust building up and collecting and excuse me, getting into everything. This great big collection of dust and bits of rock and other stuff is what we call the Palouse. You know why it has that wavy rolling hill shape? Because underneath it all, it was set down by these big floods of lava, and they rolled along and made those kind of wiggly shapes. You know what else is in those big rolling hills of dirt that are sitting on the floodplains of old volcanoes? Giant earthworms. But it's a little too late to talk about those. We'll have to save stories about them for another time. So here we are at the McConnell mansion in a little town that got its name about 143 years ago. And that town has only moved 5.6 feet away from where we are right now in all those years. Remember those big continents moving around? They take a long time to get anywhere. And 143 years to them is just nothing. But that's long enough for a lot of people to have come and gone. And before this place was a town, it was an outpost. You see, Idaho wasn't even a state way back then. It was a territory, which is a big region of land when our country was still brand new. There were people around here and settlers coming into the outpost. Well, when you're talking settlers, you're talking folks who desperately want to buy some of the comforts of the places they left behind when they came out here. Traders set up shop in the area to make sure settlers have got nice things like fancy soap and coffee. One of those traders that was set up here had come all the way over from Russia. He set up shop in this area to supply the settlers, and when it came time to name this town, well, he asked to name it after the city of Moscow in Russia, and so they did. Now, the third governor of Idaho, William J. McConnell, yes, the William J. McConnell, whose house we're all gathered at, told this story about how Moscow got its name. And he told it to a Northern Pacific Railway agent who sent that in a letter up to his boss in Spokane. As far as Mr. McConnell remembers, it was that Russian trader who helped give the town its name. On the other hand, the person who officially gave the town its name is a man named Samuel Neff, who was our postmaster and needed to give an official name to this place so we could establish a post office. At the time, this was called Paradise Valley, which is why you still have Paradise Creek running through town. Samuel was born in Moscow, Pennsylvania, and some say he thought it would be nice to name this town after his old town. So he filed the paperwork, and ta-da, Moscow got its name. But I've heard a different story. You see, I asked the Crows about this when we were talking about the geology of the region, and they told me, caw, 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 which is Crow for, yes, a Russian trader giving the town its name is pretty plausible, and officially the paperwork for the town was filed by Samuel Neff, but we have heard differently. So for your benefit, I'll translate this from the original Crow into our human tongue. A long time ago, but not so long as all of that, there was a farmer who had 3 herds of cows, or had a herd of 3 cows, Ross, Floss, and Moss. Ross and Floss were good cows, and they made sure to wait patiently to be milked and would never kick or move around when being brushed down. They always came into the barn at night and brushed their teeth and said their prayers and went to bed like their mama and papa cows told them. But then there was Moss. She had big brown eyes and a bright yellow bow around her tail, but she was a naughty cow. She ran with a bad herd of rebellious cows who wouldn't brush their teeth or eat all of their breakfast. These bovine baddies were real jerks. They thought nothing of sneaking out after curfew to go run around in the fields. They'd go munching on Farmer McGregor's prize clover plants and tipping over Baron von Hamhock, who was Farmer Johnson's prize pig. That's why you don't see folks put cows together with pigs, especially naughty cows like Moss. They'll just push a big porker like the Baron right over, and he goes wee, 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 all the way home to tell his piggy parents what happened. And wouldn't you know it, by the time Mama and Papa von Hamhock have made it out to the field, Moss and her herd of hooligans have run off, snickering cowishly to themselves. Late one night, after Ross and Floss had gone to sleep in their nice clean barn, Moss snuck outside to cause mischief with her friends. But this time, Farmer Johnson and Farmer McGregor were up waiting. They had had enough with all the chewing of their clover and the pushing of the pigs. They had waited up all night, and as soon as they caught sight of the big brown eyes of Moss and bright yellow bow on her tail, they recognized her right away. Both of them jumped up at the same time, shouted, "There she is! It's that Moss cow!" Well, Samuel Neff, who was working very late at night at the very last minute trying to come up with a name for his new postal office, overheard their shout. And he wrote that down on his form and sent it in to the Postmaster General. Oh, and Moss was sent to bed without her dinner for being so naughty. And that, my friends, is probably, sort of, maybe how the town of Moscow got its name. Anyway, that's what the crows tell me, and you know what kind of stories they tell.